What's up, everybody? Welcome back to your favorite New York Jets subscription podcast, Badlands. I'm your host, Joe Caporoso. The draft guide is out. The draft is here in 2 days. Connor's almost through it. He's been working 14 days a week. We got so much to talk about tonight. I'm freaking out a little bit. There's a lot of chatter about the Jets going defense early. I got a lot of questions and thoughts on the draft guide, and I got the best guy with me to talk about it. Connor, how you doing? How you feeling?
I'm good, hanging in there. Draft Guide's live. I know people have asked, it's coming a deep dive. It launched for War Room. I think we're at least 220 reports. There was a couple that when we published the guide just got stuck. Like we had to push through Abdul Carter and Travion Henderson. So if you missed those on first glance, they're all in there now. There should be 220 reports, obviously position rankings, my 320 player big board. Shout out to Dan. The design and the flow of it is amazing as always. Shout out to the team, which obviously Dan also writes reports. Paul, Greg, Max, and Meeks. It's great that it's here. It's a relief. I hope everybody enjoys it as much as we love making it. And now it's time for the real thing. And it wouldn't be draft week without the classic Jets scare nuggets floating around. What could actually incite the fan base? So that's how you know we're 48 hours out.
So where we're seeing some of the panic is there has been a range of chatter that the Jets are seriously considering Jahdae Barron with the 7th pick, a defensive back, corner, safety, probably going to play corner. The guide projects him as a corner. Not saying he's a bad player, not saying he's a bad prospect. The thought of the Jets spending a pick on a guy who is predominantly a corner after they paid Michael Carter, after they're about to pay Sauce, with what the rest of their roster looks like, unless this guy is Ronnie Lott or name the next coming of Sauce Gardner. It feels insane to me to be considered as a pick.
Yeah.
There is also further chatter around Jalen Walker and around Mikkel, which when I look at your guys' rankings, we're talking about the 4th and 5th edges here, with Shamar Stewart. And I'm how are any of these guys even in a serious discussion to be the 7th pick with all the other needs? And the fact that just Warren and Membu and Banks even are not substantially, but better players, higher ranked players. Let's start with Barron. How does this even come about? Because it almost feels like it's let me just pick a random defensive player who's going to go in the top 20 and just slap him with the Jets at 7. And again, it's not a knock on the player, who I think can and will be a good pro. Saw plenty of him at Texas, even as a casual college football fan. No doubt he can play, but it just feels patently insane to me if the Jets are going to go defensive back at 7, especially someone who is kind of like a hybrid. And I don't know if he's going to be a safety or corner because he's on the smaller side. What the hell's going on here? Because I'm getting a little freaked out even that we're leading the pod with it.
Yeah, I'll start with this. I would be pretty surprised really surprised if they took Barron at 7. And I'd still be a little surprised if they traded out and they still took him for a lot of the reasons you said. I don't think he's a real outside, shutdown outside corner at the next level. I like him better, kind of what the Eagles drafted Cooper DeJean to do last year, or the Chiefs a couple of years ago with Trent McDuffie. And whatever this Jets regime thinks about Michael Carter, because they aren't the ones that paid him, he's here and he's a good player and he's under contract, where you might use the 7th overall pick on somebody that projects best to cover the slot and play some safety and play some corner. And I asked about this, and the person I trust the most was I don't see that one happening, pretty confidently, but we'll see. It's draft week. I'm not going to sit here and tell you anything is for certain. I was surprised when they took Sauce. So you get surprised, but Jahdae Barron would really, really surprise me. But it is an easy rumor to stir up because, one, he's a great scheme fit and the type of player Glenn would like, right? And a lot of people are looking back to when the Lions took Brian Branch. I don't know if that's apples to apples, but I think when it comes down to it, it's great PR for Barron, right? Hey, the Jets really like this guy. Aaron Glenn likes this guy, 7th overall. For a player to me that I would be more comfortable taking around in the early 20s, that's a big difference. A first round pick in the early 20s and a top 10 pick. So once again, would be really surprised if Barron is the pick at 7. Would still be surprised if they traded out and took him anyway. Now, the defense conversation, I wouldn't say I'd be floored if they took a defensive player, but I definitely feel strongly about them not. And I'm usually not like that. Like when they took Will McDonald, I was like, hey, I like Will McDonald. Like he's a good pass rusher. We weren't expecting this, but it doesn't take away from the player. This is a situation where, if they took Mason Graham, okay, Graham's a really, really good player, and Graham has to be there for them to take him. But
number 5 on your big board. So you're getting him at number 7. Okay. I can live with that.
But who is number 6 on the big board?
Tyler Warren.
Right.
We're going to have to talk about in the back half of the pod, but the other names, man, Mikel's at 43.
I mean,
Shamar's at 17. Even Jalen Walker is at 19. Like these names, they scare the shit out of me. And it further, when I read your guys' rankings and I read what they project to, even any of the 3 of them being considered at 7 feels kind of insane to me.
Yeah, it does. And I would be very, disappointed with just that kind of philosophy out of the gate from the regime, for the fact that, something we said about Joe Douglas a lot, and this was, I think, a huge divide with the fan base, part of the fan base, one part of the fan base, another part of the fan base, and definitely Badlands was on a side. There's a difference between just accumulating talent, drafting players you like, and building a team. And I think Joe Douglas had a lot of really positive PR longer than he should have, because the Jets previously under McCagnon were not only bad at building a team, but they were bad at accumulating talent. So when Douglas started to accumulate some talent, it felt like a big win. And there was times it really was. Don't get me wrong. I'm not taking away from everything he did. But he never built a football team. And what I mean by that is they always were like missing key ingredients in key areas, and they never actually had an identity that they could scheme to on offense. Obviously, defense, it felt like they had a 2-year run with Saleh where they built that with a lot of their young players and developed it, and it worked until it didn't. But offensively, they didn't. And why I would be so disappointed if in a defensive pick, especially like a Mikel, or I like Shamar quite a bit, but I'd still be disappointed in that idea of building a team that way, is like this offense needs a lot of help. And this is a prime opportunity. This is the 7th overall pick in the draft to help a key spot, whether that's right tackle in Membu, or obviously, by the way, you see what name popped up this week is Kelvin Banks, which
all of a sudden he's back.
You heard here 2 weeks ago. And then you look at Warren, because Warren is not only one of the best players in the draft, but he helps both your run and pass game, where the Jets need to get better at running the ball, specifically the blocking from their tight end and at right tackle. And they need to get better at pass catcher, because after Garrett Wilson, it's not pretty. So Warren kind of gives you a little 2-for-1 punch. So, and I get people like tight end at 7, but they're not evaluating the draft as a whole. So I think when I look at it like that, it would make the uphill climb they're facing much more difficult, because isn't the point of hiring Aaron Glenn that you're going to be able to develop some defensive talent from day 2 and day 3 and the UDFA process and the street free agent process? And they paid Brandon Stevens a lot of money. Like they paid Brandon Stevens a lot of money.
Amount of money.
They paid Cisco
Stevens
a good
in
amount of
particular.
money. Right. Yeah. They're paying Michael Carter decent money. They're going to pay Sauce Gardner the number 1 corner deal. And they're going to pay Jermaine one day, probably. I hope Will McDonald is a good fit in this defense. They're already paying Q. At some point, like, look at the allocation. They paid Sherwood a ton of money. So at some point, and they paid Sherwood a ton of money, not Joe Douglas in the previous regime. So at some point, you need to allocate assets to the offensive side of the ball that also fit the identity you want. The offense schematically is going to look a lot different this year, but they don't have all the ingredients yet. They have an opportunity to get some of those ingredients right now, and they brought in Fields to see what he could do. So I just look at it, and I don't want to sound childish by being like, if they don't take an offensive player at 7, like, they failed. But it would be a big uphill climb if they did that and only make their jobs harder, because I'm not evaluating on just offense and defense. I'm evaluating on what the strengths of the board are. And outside of Mason Graham, it's offensive line and it's tight end, like Warren, Loveland, Membu, Banks. And we don't talk about Ted McMillan because it doesn't feel like it's happening, but Ted McMillan is a completely viable 7th overall pick in this draft for the New York Jets at number 2 wide receiver. where you look at a lot of the guys on defense outside of Graham, it's a lot of projects. Michael Williams is a project right now, okay? Shamar does a lot of good things, but there's aspects of his game as a pass rusher that is a project. Jalen Walker is very, very raw. So Jahdae Barron has played a lot of college football, but once again, that's not a need for this team. So, yeah, there's a lot going on, and I think at the end of the day, logic will prevail. Thursday, when you guys are reacting to the pick, I still think it's going to be Tyler Warren or an offensive tackle, but there's been plenty of surprises in the draft before.
So if we go back to our comfort food, we have Tyler Warren at 6 with a George Kittle comparison from our guy Max, who had a must listen hour podcast with Paul earlier on the feed this week. And has been doing the Lord's work in the Discord as the great tight end wars have broken out. And I just tweeted this before we recorded that I've mocked Warren to the Jets for a really outside of Graham. He's the guy I've talked about the most as being the pick, something that I'm comfortable with. And it makes me feel better seeing you guys have him at 6 because the value's there. It makes me feel better seeing the Kittle and Shockey comparisons thrown around.
Yeah, I think he's a Shockey clone. I do.
Because I agree with the general sentiment that you and Max and others have been arguing that he is going to impact the game on all 3 downs. He is going to help the situation at right tackle. He's going to help the situation at pass catcher. And he's going to play with a certain physicality and mentality this offense needs, and that will match up to the identity they're trying to build. And he's also one of the 7th best players in the class. So taking him at 7 is totally reasonable. Now, you could make a very fair argument that they should just get the right tackle. It's why a lot of us, yourself included, have also mocked Membu to the Jets at 7, who is number 9 in your big board, and compared to Christian Darrisaw, a guy that we actually get a question about this we'll address in War Room, looking at the AVT trade in retrospect, that maybe in another world could have been on the Jets, and now maybe this is your chance to go get that guy. And then you skip a little further down, and only a little further down. Banks is right at 14, where 7 to 14, it's not the best, but it's also not a massive gap where you're going to be freaking out about that. And also begs the question, could you trade down for your 4 spots and still get him? Tet sandwiched in there at 11 with the Cortland Sutton comparison, a player that both of us like and have often discussed the Jets trying to trade for. This would be a way to get a younger version of him. Not really being talked about a ton. That doesn't mean that he's not potentially in contention. I do still think that, and I think most betting odds reflect this, that it's Warren or Membu sort of as a coin flip as the favorite. And then Banks kind of seems like more of the fallback than Will Campbell at this point. If for whatever reason he begins to fall, and you have Campbell as the top 8 player in this draft. And I think it's not about the talent. It's just about
he's a guard.
Yeah. What is he going to play at the level? And the Jets seem pretty adamant about keeping AVT at guard. So, I think as it stands for me, if you get Warren, you got the 6th best player in the draft. You get Membu, you got a top 10 player in the draft, arguably at a position of more importance. So you cancels out those few spots. And I do think it's less of an extreme version than what happened with Bowers, where he was just around in the discourse for a while and he got overanalyzed, I think. And there was the pictures of him next to Gronk and he's so small and what can he really do? He's going to be this one-dimensional player. And he was just awesome as a rookie. I don't think there was ever really any doubt he was going to be an awesome pro. I don't think Warren is a Bowers level prospect, but I do also think that there's a touch too much of over-analysis here because I get the concerns about the age. I get the concerns about most of the production being siloed into 1 year. I think the concerns about his athleticism are being a little overstated because I think he's a really good athlete and I think he's a really physical player. And I think the size, speed, physicality combination is really unique. And I see a very high floor, if nothing else.
Me too.
And I talked about this a lot yesterday because I just couldn't believe how intense the debates were breaking out. I just can't see this being a pick where if you're a Jets fan, you're like, oh man, this is a disaster. And I don't care that they took Kyle Brady 2.5 decades ago. It has nothing to do with this at all. I just remain in the very, I guess it's not like hot take or crazy camp that you should be perfectly fine with Warren or Membu. What is driving the sort of last gasps of, well, Warren can't be a top 10 player in this class? Because I do feel like if for whatever reason the Jets don't take him at 7, Membu's there, they want to take him, they want to take Banks. Warren's going to be gone by 9 or 10. This isn't a guy who's going to fall to like
No.
23 in this class. So as you wrap the guide, what are your final thoughts on probably the most popular mock pick to the Jets overall?
I mean, I think when you look at it with Warren, you have to kind of go through a checklist, right? You need to get better. You need, number one, we've said this for a long time. The Jets need to become a bigger, more physical football team because look at the teams that are remaining at the end of the year. And Max does a really good job illustrating this in a lot of his analysis. It's part of the reason I brought him on board. I pushed to bring him on board to write up all our tight ends. Is that yes, your offensive line matters to your run game, duh. But so often, especially what Tanner Engstrand wants to do, that tight end as the sixth blocker is really the difference of what you can and can't do. So that's a huge factor for this team. And I think there's some weird narrative in this draft. I've noticed that this is an awesome tight end class. I think it's rare that there are two first round players in it, in Loveland and Warren. But I think that after that, it's a lot of role player guys. Like Mason Taylor is the only other one, and he's a jack of all trades, master of none. He's not the receiver as a route runner or is hands wise as Loveland, and he's not as big and physical as Warren. So, but he's just a solid player. And then everyone else kind of is a role, like Arroyo's a better pass catcher, and Fannon's obviously all pass catching. And you look at Jackson Hawes, like he's all blocking. That's kind of the aisle you start to shop in, and that's fine if that's what the Jets want to do. But I think I'd rather want to have the complete player. And it's funny to me, like Warren is the type of player you would think the first touchdown he catches, this fan base would be going ballistic, and the first block he makes on the edge to spring a long run, this fan base would be going ballistic. So you always want guys that make life easier on your quarterback. And the trickle effect of what makes life easy on a quarterback is one, being able to run the football first and foremost and always and forever. And two, guys that can play above the rim. And three, guys that can make plays after the catch. He helps all three of those things. So I think it's just, listen, the most important thing Glenn and Engstrand are going to have to do here is establish what kind of team they want this to be. Because it's something that, for the most part, I would say every coach has failed at drastically since Rex Ryan. We knew exactly what the 2009 and 2010 New York Jets were, and they were really damn good at it. They ran the football, and they played defense for days. And it's deeper than that, but at its core, that's what they did. And yeah, everybody would love to run the football and play defense because that's a great way to play. But you actually have to draft the personnel and use the personnel to do those things. Now, I think this is the start of that mission for Glenn, is kind of not necessarily cloning the Lions, but being that physical football team, being a tough football team to play against, being a hardworking, faster team. So I don't know. It's crazy that I have to argue this much for Warren. And I'm not even this person that's like, take Warren at 7 or you failed the draft. But I definitely feel pretty strongly that they should take him. It's a little crazy that we got here. And I think he's a player that you'd go into day 2 and you'd feel really, really good about things because you feel like, okay, he's going to help the right tackle we're drafting today because we could park him next to that right tackle. And that's going to make life easier on that player. And then obviously you can capitalize, as we've done with the mock draft exercises here, like you can capitalize on the depth of this defensive line class deeper in the draft. And the same goes for wide receiver at times as well. So I don't know. It's maybe that's not like anybody that doesn't want Warren at this point. I don't know if that's going to sway them over, but I think you have to kind of come to terms with the fact that this draft is not littered with the standard blue chip talent at the top, and don't be ultimately so adverse to positions that, you know, aren't typically drafted that early. When in this draft, you got to get a above average starter with the 7th overall pick. And out of all the options we went through today, like if we're not talking about Tet, it's, you know, him, Warren, Membu, and Banks are the answer to that, where the risk on defense obviously is higher and makes it that much harder to build an offense.
For those of you watching on YouTube, please jump over to Patreon to see the full episode and to have more coming tomorrow from our war room and other episodes and our draft guide and all that good stuff. So that's patreon.com/Badlands TOJ. Also, a mid-episode reminder, get over to Underdog and use promo code Badlands because we got pick'ems, we got best ball flowing. So quick deposit match, promo code Badlands. Now's the time to hit it. So see